Welcome to the Security Goals and Concepts lecture in the first security section. Let's discuss access and security. Let's imagine that someone has $10 to save. Let's imagine that this person has bought a safe that costs $1,000 to keep these $10 safe. Of course, he would look insane if he does so. This is the balance between access and security. This is the balance between what are the efforts you are exerting to keep your assets secure and how much does it cost if you lose these assets. Balance between access and security should be kept in mind for every security specialist, because sometimes the security specialist makes the security very complicated so that the legitimate users themselves suffer to reach the resources they need to do their work. Sometimes the security is so much costly for the legitimate access to be done. So you must keep balance between security and access to be a good security specialist. What are the goals of the security? The goals of the security is to keep three important things: confidentiality, availability, and integrity of the resources you are securing. Confidentiality, integrity, availability, CIA. It is not the American intelligence, it is the security goals. Confidentiality is keeping information and resources away from being read or being known by illegitimate users. Integrity is keeping it away from change and modification. Availability is keeping it alive, keeping it valid, keeping it there for the legitimate users to access. So when these three circles meet, the point of intersection is the point of security. The point of intersection is where security exists. The confidentiality is ensuring that information is not revealed to unauthorized persons. Data, while being transmitted or while being stored, should only be revealed to intended audience. This is keeping confidentiality. Integrity is ensuring consistency of data, ensuring that data has not been changed or modified, either while stored or transmitted. Integrity is making it possible to detect any modification of data. Availability is ensuring that legitimate users are not denied of access to information and resources. To protect from the DOS attacks, the denial of service attacks. Availability is ensuring that the service is there and the service is existing for legitimate users to access. The assets. The assets is a very important concept that we should know about as security specialists. Everything that has value for an organization or that has impact on the business continuity is an asset. People, data, hardware, software, physical devices, and documents, all of these are assets for the organization. And assets differs from an organization to another. For example, a bank, the most precious assets for it is the client accounts. A hospital, the most precious assets for it is the medical records of the patients. Software house, the most precious assets are the patents and source codes. For a university, for example, teaching materials and grades of the students are the most important assets to protect and to keep safe. Assets should be identified to create information security system. You should know what you are protecting as security specialist. You should know what is the most precious thing for this organization to protect most. Security specialist, good one, must be fully aware of the assets he or she is protecting inside the organization. What is a threat? A threat can be a person or a thing or an event or an idea which poses danger to an asset. The threat is a possible breach to the following: to confidentiality, to integrity, to availability of resources, or even to the legitimate use of these resources. It's a possible means of breaching a security policy, and we will talk much more about policy in the coming sections. It's exploiting a vulnerability intentionally or accidentally. It's obtaining or damaging or destroying an asset. This is a threat. or possibly doing so. A threat is what we are trying to protect assets against. What is a vulnerability? A vulnerability is the backdoor, is the weakness, is the workaround, is the absence of safeguards. Holes or gaps in a security system or security program is a vulnerability. It can be exploited by threats to gain unauthorized access to an asset. A vulnerability is a backdoor in our protection efforts. Exploit. Exploit is a program or script or code that is targeting a vulnerability. It aims to perform unauthorized operation. An example of an exploit is a backdoor Trojan used to grant unauthorized access to a machine. An exploit is the way or a tool by which an attacker uses a vulnerability to damage the target system. What is a risk? The risk is a measure of the cost of a realized vulnerability. It is the potential for loss or damaging or destroying an asset inside the organization. The risk is a result of a threat exploiting a vulnerability. Risks exist when our system have a vulnerability that a given threat can attack. Security mainly deals with managing risk to your critical assets. Security basically is an exercise in loss reduction and risk reduction. It's impossible to eliminate risk totally. I cannot say whatever happens inside this organization, risk is 0%. This is not existing. This is impossible. But risk is the probability of a threat crossing or touching a vulnerability. Your target is to minimize risk, to make it as minimum as possible, to diminish its effect, to minimize its existence, but you can never eliminate the risk totally. The impact. The impact is a result of an exploited vulnerability, is the effect. The impact can be deleted files, loss of information, loss of the company image, loss of privacy of the clients, loss of any of the CIA is the impact. It is the effect. It is the possible damage for the assets that being protected. The risk assessment depends on a very well-known formula. The risk is the quotient of the multiplication of threat times vulnerability times impact. Sometimes it is threat times vulnerability only without multiplying impact, but we here introduce the more complete formula. The vulnerability could be the password that is vulnerable for dictionary or exhaustive key attacks or guessing. The weak password is a vulnerability. The threat is the intruder or the attacker who is trying to guess this password, to brute force this password, to try to know what this password is. If it is weak and the threat exists, then the risk is very high. The risk resources within the system are prone for illegal access, modification, or damage by the intruder. This is the risk. If the threat is high, the vulnerability is high, the impact is high, so you have a very high risk. Sometimes you have a very high vulnerability but a low threat, so you have a low risk. Sometimes you have a very high threat, very high vulnerability but a very low impact. Nothing will happen if this password has been guessed, so the risk here is low. Risk is high when the three parameters are high: threat, vulnerability, and impact. By this, we hope that we have introduced some of the security goals and concepts. Thank you.